No one knew who she was, just a quiet orphan with no last name and eyes that looked older than the sky. But when a wild white Mustang shattered fences at the Iron Bell auction and that girl stepped forward without fear, the world held its breath. They called it luck. Evelyn Kane called it destiny. And the wind, it just whispered her name like it never forgot. The wind came down hard from the western ridge, stirring up the red dirt that clung to the cracked porch steps of Dry Creek Home for Girls. Inside, the walls were the color of oatmeal and just about as warm. Lila Monroe sat cross-legged on the thin mattress of her bunk, tracing circles in the dust on the windowsill with one finger. Outside, clouds piled like mountains, but her eyes were on something else. A white horse, barely visible in her mind, standing still in the morning fog. She'd seen it in her dreams since she was 6. A white Mustang, untamed, unnamed, always looking at her, never speaking, but somehow calling her anyway. She didn't tell the other girls. They wouldn't understand. They'd laugh, like they laughed when her clothes didn't fit, or when she ate slowly to make the food last. Dreams were the only place Lila felt seen. The bell clanged twice in the hallway. Miss Doreen, the house matron, shouted without turning her head, "Auction day, girls! Y'all best be ready in 5, or I'm leaving whoever ain't dressed." There was a chorus of groans, some shuffling. Lila stood, already dressed in her 2 small jeans and a faded flannel shirt she'd sewn a button back onto herself. Her boots were scuffed to ruin, but they were hers. The kids piled into the rickety bus that always smelled of old vinyl and mildew, chugging its way past canyons and open plains. Their destination, Iron Bell Auction House. A weather-worn barn on the edge of town, where ranchers came for livestock, old equipment, or once in a blue moon. A legend. Lila stared out the window as they bumped along the dirt road. The clouds above shifted in silence. Somewhere deep in her chest, she felt it again. Today was the day. The auction yard buzzed with energy cowboys in sun-worn hats, women in denim jackets holding onto coffee cups, kids darting between hay bales. The auctioneer's voice echoed from a tin speaker as if the microphone were choking on dust. Lila kept close to the back of the group, her eyes scanning the holding pens along the fence. Most horses stood restless but tethered. Then she saw it, at the very edge of the corral, alone in a pen with extra boards bolted on. The Mustang was white as smoke. Its coat shimmered like it had never known dust, though the mud told otherwise. A black stripe ran down its mane like an old scar. Its eyes, pale and wild, swept the crowd but didn't settle. Until they did, on her. It was only for a second, maybe less. But it was enough. The air shifted. The wind dropped. "Move it, girl," Doreen snapped, yanking her by the arm. "Don't go gawking at the rejects." Rejects. That's what they called the untrainables, the ones who'd been caught wild and never broke. Dangerous. Worth nothing to most folks. This one had kicked through 2 stalls the night before, they said. Nearly took a rancher's jaw clean off. It wasn't supposed to be on the sale docket at all, just penned there until someone figured out how to put it down or lock it up. But something was different now. Lila stepped away from the group. The horse moved too. Gasps rose as it slammed against the wooden boards, shrieking, no, crying out as if the very sky hurt. The crowd backed off. A man's Stetson flew from his head. One of the ranch hands cursed and reached for a tranquilizer gun. But then Lila climbed over the first rung of the fence. "Lila Monroe," Doreen screamed. "Get down from there. Are you out of your damn—" Lila didn't hear her. All she saw was the horse. The white Mustang stopped thrashing. Its hooves steadied. Its body tensed, but didn't run. It lowered its head. And in a silence that seemed to swallow the world whole, it walked straight toward her. Not in rage, not in fear, but like it knew her. Lila stepped off the last rung and into the pen. Someone knocked over a crate. A baby cried. A man cursed again, this time softer. Then came the hush. The kind of hush that happens when the wind leaves the prairie. The horse was just inches from her now. Lila reached out slowly, letting her hand hover in the air. The Mustang touched its nose to her palm and kneeled, not in a trick, not in pain, but like a soldier recognizing its commander. "Good Lord," someone whispered. Lila turned around. Everyone was watching, frozen, unsure if they were witnessing a miracle or madness. And then a voice rang out, sharp as a whip, "I'll take them both." From the back of the crowd, a woman stepped forward. Tall, with silver hair pulled back tight and a green wool coat that looked like it cost more than the whole auction house. Her boots clicked on the gravel like gavel strikes. "That girl, that horse, I'm buying both." The auctioneer stammered, "Ma'am, we don't usually, They're not for sale," Doreen barked. "That girl's under my custody. That horse is marked for." "I said I'm buying them," the woman repeated, her voice like velvet wrapped around a blade. "This isn't a suggestion." She turned her eyes on Lila, who was still kneeling beside the horse, one hand resting gently on its neck. "They're a matched pair," the woman said quietly, almost to herself. "And I don't believe in coincidence." She reached into her coat and handed the auctioneer a check, already signed. "I'm Evelyn Kane. Have the paperwork sent to Rock Haven." Then she walked away, her shadow trailing long behind her. That night, back in the pen, Lila sat beside the Mustang, now quiet, eyes half closed. She didn't ask where they were going. She didn't know why the woman had chosen her. All she knew was that for the first time in her life, someone looked at her and didn't see a number, or a burden, or a lost cause. They saw a key, and a lock, and something that was never meant to be broken, but set free. She whispered one word into the horse's ear, so soft only the wind heard. "Whisper." The horse didn't flinch, only bowed its head, as if in agreement, as if it had just been waiting for her to remember. The wheels of the black truck hummed against the gravel road, climbing higher into the hills like a song slowly building. Lila sat in the back seat, her hands folded in her lap, watching the landscape blur into pine and dusk. The white Mustang Whisper trailed behind in a separate trailer, but somehow she could still feel him. Like a thread between their hearts stretched taut, humming with every bend in the road. Evelyn Kane didn't speak during the ride. She didn't need to. Her presence was heavy enough to make the silence feel crowded. The air changed as they passed an old iron gate with the word Rock Haven forged into the arch above. Moss clung to the letters. The trees pressed close to the driveway like sentinels guarding a secret. And then the house appeared. More fortress than farmhouse, it stood 3 stories tall, built from stone the color of storms. Vines crawled up its sides like ancient scars. Tall windows stared out over the land like eyes that never blinked. The barn beyond it was long and low, the roof red but weathered to rose-gray, and the paddock stretched out into the fog-draped hills like a forgotten kingdom. Lila swallowed hard. This wasn't a place for children. Evelyn climbed down from the driver's seat with the grace of someone who hadn't rushed a day in her life. She opened the back door for Lila but didn't offer a hand, just nodded toward the house. "I'll have Ruby May show you your room," she said. "The attic. It's quiet up there." That was all. No welcome, no rules, no comfort. But Lila wasn't expecting any. She followed the woman up the stone steps, the musty smell of history hitting her like a wave as the front door creaked open. Inside, everything was still. Too still. The walls were lined with oil paintings of horses, some galloping, some standing in mist, one rearing with a rider cloaked in red. Chandeliers hung like skeletal ghosts from the high ceiling. A long hallway stretched ahead, lit by flickering sconces. A woman stood at the end of it. "Ruby May," Evelyn said without turning around. "She's yours now." The woman, short, round, maybe in her 60s, had a kind face, worn like river stone. Her apron was streaked with flour, and she held a rag in one hand like it belonged there. "Well," Ruby May said softly, "ain't you just a wisp of a thing?" Lila didn't answer. Her throat had gone tight. Ruby didn't press. She just smiled and motioned with her head. "This way, darlin'. I'll show you where the wind sleeps." The attic room was small but warm. Slanted ceilings, a window that looked out over the fields, and a bed tucked into the corner with a patchwork quilt that smelled faintly of cedar and lavender. A small wooden desk stood under the window, and beside it a nightstand with a cracked ceramic lamp shaped like a horse. "It ain't much," Ruby said, setting a folded towel on the foot of the bed. "But she's cozy. You holler if you need anything. I'm just downstairs most hours." Lila stood in the doorway for a moment, unsure if she was allowed to cross in. No one had ever given her a room before. Not really. This wasn't a bunk bed in a line of 30. This was hers. Ruby started to walk away, then turned and added gently, "I leave notes on the desk some mornings. Just little things. Recipes, thoughts. You don't have to read 'em, but I reckon sometimes the wind talks better through paper." And with that, she was gone. That night, Lila couldn't sleep. The house creaked with memory. The wind howled like it had a name to call, but forgot how to say it. She slipped out of bed, bare feet quiet against the floorboards, and tiptoed down the staircase, careful not to wake the ghosts in the paintings. Outside, the moon turned the grass silver. She padded across the porch, around the barn, and found the paddock where Whisper had been placed. He stood in the center, still as stone, eyes on the hills. No halter, no rope. Just presence. Lila climbed up onto the lowest rail and sat, pulling her knees to her chest. "I don't know what this place is," she whispered, "but it's weird, not like the others. And Evelyn, she looks at me like she already knows what I'm going to say before I say it." Whisper didn't move. "I think I'm scared," she added, voice smaller now. The wind blew gently through the trees, brushing her face like a mother's hand. Whisper took one step forward, then another. He stopped just in front of her, eyes level. Lila reached through the slats and laid her hand on his cheek. "I dreamed about you," she said, "before all this, for years. I thought you were just a wish I made up. But now you're here, and I'm here, and I don't know what that means." The horse leaned into her touch just a little. Behind her, the porch light flicked on. Evelyn Kane stood in the doorway, backlit and still. "You'll learn to listen," she said, not unkindly, "not just with ears." Then she turned off the light and went back inside. The next morning, a note waited on the desk. "Some winds blow only once. Follow them." No name. No date. But Lila smiled anyway. Over the next week she settled into a rhythm. Ruby May made breakfast every morning. Cornbread, bacon, sometimes apples and cinnamon when the trees were kind. Evelyn came and went like a shadow, speaking rarely, watching always. And Whisper waited. He didn't graze with the others. The other horses gave him space like he was lightning wrapped in skin. Even the stable hands stayed away. Rumors trickled in. Broken fences, lights flickering, cold patches that followed his stall. But Lila wasn't afraid. Each night she returned to the paddock. She never brought sugar cubes or carrots, only her presence and the wind, and somehow that was enough. She began to understand him not in words, but in echoes, in the way his ears flicked when she was near, in the steps he took when she hummed an old lullaby from before she could remember. One night, the moon high and heavy, Whisper trotted a circle in the pasture, then stopped at a strange angle, his head cocked toward the west hills. He pawed once, twice, then looked back at her. Lila climbed the fence and dropped into the grass. He led her out beyond the paddocks, past the line where fences gave up trying, up a gentle rise where wild grass danced like sea waves. There he stopped, and so did she. A stone jutted from the earth, tall, narrow, carved with markings she didn't know but felt like she should. Lila reached out, brushing her fingers over a spiral etched near the top. It pulsed, warm, alive. And then something clicked inside her, a memory not hers, a voice not spoken, a wind that circled around her head, tugging her hair, pulling her shirt like a child begging to be followed. She backed away slowly, heart thudding. Whisper didn't follow. He just watched, waiting. Lila turned back toward the house, her mind spinning. She didn't know what the stone was. But she knew this. It had been waiting for her, just like he had. And maybe, just maybe, everything was starting again, not with a bang, but with a whisper. The days at Rock Haven began to lose their edges. Time blurred into something softer, stranger. Mornings bled into dusks, the sky always cloaked in some shade of lavender or ash. Lila found herself waking at odd hours, unsure if she'd dreamed a thing or lived it. The attic room, once warm, now felt like it was holding its breath. And the dreams, they were growing sharper. Each night, Lila slipped into sleep like falling through a page, and each time she landed in the same place, a field wrapped in fog and the sound of hooves echoing not from the ground, but from the air. Whisper always stood at the center, his white coat glowing faintly, his eyes full of something not meant for this world. And there was always a hum, a sound that wasn't sound, like something just on the edge of memory, calling her name without ever speaking it. She tried telling Ruby May once. "I see things," Lila murmured over breakfast, her spoon turning circles in a bowl of oatmeal. "But not with my eyes." Ruby didn't flinch. She just poured more coffee and said, "Sometimes the truth don't come with pictures. Sometimes it comes with chills." Evelyn Kane, seated at the far end of the table, folded her newspaper slowly. "What did you see?" she asked without looking up. Lila hesitated. "Nothing," she said finally, but Evelyn already knew. That night the wind changed. It wasn't just colder, it was purposeful. It crept in under doors, whispered through cracks in the barn. Horses paced in their stalls. Even the hawks in the rafters refused to call. Lila awoke with her heart hammering, sweat chilling her back, the blankets tangled around her ankles. She sat up. The attic window was wide open. She hadn't touched it. A strand of her hair fluttered across her face. She stood, pulled on her jacket, and padded downstairs without making a sound. Outside, the moon was gone. Clouds hung like wet wool in the sky. Only the trees whispered to each other in a language older than words. Whisper was waiting, not in the paddock, but by the edge of the field, no halter, no rope, just waiting, like he knew. Lila didn't pause. She stepped into the grass barefoot, each blade cold and slick with dew, and walked toward him. Whisper turned slowly, leading her west, his hooves making no sound. They passed the outer fence, past the place where the grass grew taller than her shoulders, past the creek where the stones glowed faintly green under moonlight. And then, at the rise where the spiral stone stood, he stopped. But this time, it wasn't alone. The clearing pulsed. Dozens of smaller stones, some half buried, some jagged as teeth, circled the center like the spokes of a great wheel. Moss covered them, but not enough to hide the strange symbols carved into their faces, and in the middle that same spiral stone, glowing faintly. Alive. Lila stepped closer. The air grew thick, like honey in her lungs. She didn't hesitate. She pressed her palm against the spiral. The ground trembled. A deep, ancient vibration rolled beneath her feet, like something enormous waking up far, far below. The spiral lit up. So did the others. Lines of light stretched across the clearing, linking the stones together in a web of glowing veins. Whisper stomped once, and the stone shifted. No, it sank, as if accepting her touch. Lila yanked her hand back, but the light clung to her fingers. Behind her, someone clapped softly. She turned. Evelyn Kane stood at the edge of the circle, wrapped in a coat made of something that looked like raven feathers, but shimmered like obsidian. "You found it," she said, as if commenting on the weather. "You knew," Lila whispered. "Of course, I was there when the last one failed." Lila stepped back. "The last one?" Evelyn walked forward slowly, her boots not making a sound. "There's a reason you were dreaming about him. A reason you walked into the ring without fear. You're not just another orphan, Lila." Lila swallowed. "You're the seventh daughter of a seventh daughter," Evelyn said. "And that's not coincidence. That's prophecy." The clearing quieted. Only the wind moved now. Whisper didn't flinch. Lila shook her head. "I don't understand." "You don't have to yet," Evelyn said, placing a hand gently on her shoulder. "You will. In time. What is this place?" "A threshold," she answered. "One of 7 doors, gates. Call them what you will. They mark the edge between what we know and what we fear." The words landed heavy. "And what's behind them?" Lila asked. Evelyn's eyes flickered. "Things that were once part of us. Things we tried to forget. But they remember." Lila looked down at her hand. The light had faded, but her palm tingled. "Why me?" "Because you listened," Evelyn said. "Because you heard him, and because the world doesn't always need a hero. Sometimes it needs a key." The next day, Ruby May left 2 notes. The first was on the breakfast table. "The gate opens when the heart agrees to forget its own name." The second was under Lila's pillow. "Etta once stood where you stand now." She sang the wrong song. Lila didn't sleep that night. Instead, she sat on the attic floor, sketching the spiral with a pencil stub onto old yellow paper, her fingers tracing the lines over and over until they wore through. She didn't know who Etta was, but she knew she had failed. And somehow she knew Evelyn had been there too. What kind of ceremony was this? What would it cost? That afternoon she saw the vans arrive, old, gray, windowless. They brought girls, young like her, all from different places. All with wide eyes and silent mouths. 6 of them. Lila was the 7th. Evelyn didn't explain. She didn't need to. They were all led to separate rooms in the stone wing of the house, given white dresses, no shoes. It wasn't just strange anymore. It was wrong. That night, Lila found Whisper pacing in his paddock, eyes wide with something more than fear, something like warning. She leaned her forehead against his, her voice barely a breath. "What do I do?" And then the wind picked up, wrapping around them both. And in that wind, she heard a voice, not his, but hers, older, wiser. "The gate does not want to be opened." It happened just before dawn, when the world still held its breath and the stars hadn't quite faded. Lila sat cross-legged in the barn, a wool blanket wrapped around her shoulders, Whisper's breath warm against her cheek. She hadn't slept. Not really. Not since the other girls arrived. They were all quiet. Too quiet. She'd caught glimpses of them through the hallway's 6 young girls, each from a different place, each with different eyes, but the same look behind them. Hollow. Waiting. She didn't know their names. Evelyn hadn't offered introductions. She had only said they were special, like Lila. And now Lila wasn't so sure she wanted to be. Whisper shifted beside her, pawing softly at the hay-covered floor. Lila reached up and stroked his neck. His coat was cool, almost damp, though the barn was warm. His eyes shimmered in the low light, catching something that wasn't there. That's when it happened. She looked straight into them, and the world fell away. She stood on a mountainside, older, somehow taller, her hands unfamiliar. Whisper stood beside her, but he looked different too. Stronger, younger, with a glimmer in his mane like starlight. Below them, a valley burned. Fire curled up from the trees, licking the sky. Shadows moved through the smoke, not people, not animals, but something in between. And above it all, a song, low and ancient. Sung in a language she couldn't name, but her bones seemed to remember. She tried to turn away, but Whisper nudged her forward. She stepped into the fire, and it parted. The memory shifted. Now she stood in a circle of stone stones, just like the ones at Rock Haven, but broken, scattered. The spiral was split down the center, and standing at its heart was a girl. Not Lila, but close. Her hair was darker, her eyes softer, her dress red like blood. She smiled, and then the stones began to fall. The girl reached out, screaming something Lila couldn't hear, and vanished into the ground. Then nothing. Lila gasped, nearly falling backward as the vision snapped shut. Whisper blinked, and suddenly he was just a horse again. But not really. She scrambled to her feet, heart thundering. The name came to her like smoke through a keyhole. "Etta," she whispered. Ruby May found her an hour later, standing barefoot in the frost-kissed grass outside the barn. "Child, you'll catch your death," Ruby said, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders. "Who's Etta?" Ruby's hand froze. Then slowly she looked down at Lila. "Where'd you hear that name?" Lila didn't answer. Ruby sighed. "Come inside. It's a long story, and you best hear it with tea." The kitchen smelled of cinnamon and wood smoke. Ruby poured 2 cups, sat down across from Lila, and folded her hands. "She was the last," Ruby said. "The last what?" "The last 7th. Before you." Lila sat straighter. She failed. Ruby didn't flinch. She ran. When it came time, took her horse and vanished, thought she could escape what she was. But the thing about destiny, Lila, it don't like being ignored. What happened to her? "No one knows," Ruby said. "Some say she died. Some say she opened a gate she couldn't close. But Evelyn, she was there. She never talks about it, but I've seen the way her face goes still when someone says the name." Lila's mouth felt dry. "She's planning something," she said, "with the other girls. Some kind of ceremony." Ruby nodded slowly. "She's been gathering them for months, waiting, watching. You weren't the first." "But I'm the key," Lila said quietly. Ruby looked at her, eyes soft and sad. "That horse picked you for a reason, baby girl, but maybe not the reason she thinks." Later that day, Lila watched Evelyn from the shadows near the library door. The woman stood at a table covered in old parchment. Symbols and sketches filled the pages. Maps, star charts, silhouettes of horses with runes carved into their flanks. She was humming. That same tune Lila had heard in the vision, but slower, darker. Then Evelyn spoke softly, to no one. "We open with the red moon. The 7th gate requires a sacrifice. This time it will hold." Lila backed away before she could hear more. She had heard enough. That night Whisper refused to sleep. He paced in his stall, snorting, stomping, his mane tangled with hay and moonlight. Lila slipped inside quietly, sat down in the corner, and waited. Eventually he stopped and looked at her. "What did you see?" she asked. He didn't move, but his eyes did. And in them Lila saw the gate, not as a thing, but a being. It lived. It waited. It wanted. She shivered, and then she heard it again, the voice in the wind. Only this time it wasn't warning her, it was asking. Will you stay? Will you stand? Lila didn't answer. Not yet. She wasn't ready. But deep down, she knew the time was coming. The gate was stirring. The other girls were being prepared like lambs to a pyre. And she was next. The next morning, she found her room stripped of all color. No books, no drawings, just the white dress folded neatly on the bed, and a note in Evelyn's handwriting. Tomorrow night, the moon rises red. Ruby May didn't speak when she brought breakfast, only looked at Lila like a storm was already coming. Why didn't you stop her? Lila asked. Ruby's eyes glistened. Because I tried, she said. Once, a long time ago, I lost someone. Lila looked at her, really looked. Etta was yours, wasn't she? Ruby nodded. She called me Mama. I called her my heart. Silence thickened between them. I don't want to fail like her, Lila whispered. Then don't, Ruby said. But don't play her game either. Lila didn't sleep that night. She sat beside Whisper until the stars burned out. She didn't speak, didn't cry. She just waited. Because deep inside, something had shifted. She no longer feared the gate. She understood it. It wasn't just a prison. It was a promise. One made long before her name was ever whispered. The moon was already red when the girls were led to the field. It hung low in the sky, swollen and glowing like an ancient wound. The kind of moon that made coyotes howl and old ranchers whisper prayers under their breath. But tonight there were no prayers, only silence and breath and the slow drumbeat of hooves. 6 girls in white dresses followed Evelyn Kane in single file, like lambs to a forgotten altar. Lila was the 7th. Whisper walked beside her, no halter, no reins only, the steady rhythm of his hooves on frosted earth. The other horses, magnificent and restless, stood tethered in the paddock, refusing to look toward the procession. Animals knew things people forgot. The spiral stone stood waiting at the far end of the pasture, obere, its surface alive with veins of silver light. The ground around it shimmered, and the grass no longer bent with the wind. It stood still, as if time itself had bowed to what was coming. Ruby May had tried to stop her from going. She'd appeared in the attic before dawn, tear-streaked and trembling, clutching an old leather pouch. "You can run," she'd whispered. "There's a car in the tool shed. Keys are in the visor. You don't have to do this." Lila had shaken her head. "I think I do." "Then take this," Ruby said, pressing the pouch into her hands. Inside, a small piece of obsidian, warm to the touch, a silver thimble, and a braided strand of white hair. "For when it asks," Ruby said, "you'll know." Now, standing before the spiral, Lila's breath fogged in the air, her hands trembling, the pouch tight in her fist. Evelyn Kane turned to face them. Her cloak snapped in the wind, the silver lining catching the moonlight like blade edges. She looked taller than usual, or maybe just darker. "In the time before time," she said, voice deep and steady, "the 7 gates held back the old ones. They beat against the walls of our world like tide upon stone, but the seals weakened, and so came the keepers." She looked at Lila. "You are the 7th daughter of a 7th daughter. The last keeper, the final key." She raised her arms. "The gate will open." And the wind died. Everything fell still. A sound like cracking stone split the silence. The spiral stone began to glow, and Lila knew. This was the moment, but something inside her whispered, "Not yet." Whisper stepped forward, his breath curling into steam. Evelyn held out her hand. "Speak the words." Lila looked down at the pouch in her hand. "You'll know." She pulled out the thimble, the obsidian, the hair, objects with no meaning to anyone but her. And suddenly they were glowing. Evelyn's eyes widened. "No," she said, stepping back. "That's not the—" But Lila was already speaking, not in English, not even in thought. The words came from her mouth like mist, like rain falling upward. A language older than bones. The spiral stone cracked down the middle. Light poured out like blood. And the gate opened. Not outward, not downward, but inward. It folded into itself, like paper burning in reverse, and revealed a corridor of air and memory. Lila's body jerked once, then again, then it went still, and her eyes turned silver. The wind howled, the other girls screamed. Whisper reared back, whinnying, his hooves slicing the night. And Lila stepped into the spiral. The gate swallowed her. Inside there was no ground, no sky, only wind and voices. They weren't words so much as feelings. Fear, regret, longing, and love. So much love it cracked her chest. She floated, no, she was the air. The spiral sang beneath her ribs, and ahead something waited, not a monster, not a god, but a memory made whole, a shape formed in the mist, tall, robed, faceless. It looked at her with something like sorrow. It spoke in the wind. Only those who know fear and still step forward may guard the threshold. "I'm not afraid," Lila whispered. The figure said nothing. Then another voice, familiar, soft. "Etta, you will be." The mist parted. Lila stepped through. She was back in the field, but different. The spiral was gone. The girls were gone. Only Evelyn remained screaming, clawing at the grass. "No, no, that's not how it's supposed to end." She rushed Lila, hands trembling, mouth foaming with fury. Whisper stepped between them, eyes glowing like twin moons. Evelyn stumbled back. "You don't know what you've done," she hissed. Lila looked her in the eye. "I do." And then light exploded from the ground, not burning, not blinding, but cleansing. The spiral rose again, this time not as stone, but as light. 7 beams arched into the sky, then disappeared into the stars. The wind settled, the field stilled. Evelyn collapsed. And Lila was gone. Whisper stood alone at the edge of the spiral's shadow. The wind curled around him, whispering songs only he could hear. Ruby May arrived minutes later, heart pounding, eyes wide. She dropped to her knees. "Lila?" The horse turned to her, and in his eyes, her, not as flesh, but as light. She was no longer girl, no longer orphan. She was gatekeeper, and she was watching. The air was different. It wasn't just colder. It hummed with something Lila couldn't name. Like the space between thunder and lightning, like the pause before a question that changes everything. She stood on nothing. There was no ground, no sky, just a horizon smeared in blue-gray light, rolling like fog across a frozen dream. Whisper was beside her, breathing slow, his silver mane lifting in a wind that wasn't really there. His hooves made no sound. But Lila felt every step like echoes through her bones. They had crossed through the spiral, not into the past, not into the future, but into the in-between. Somewhere in the distance, a melody played not made by instruments or voice, but memory. It looped over and over, made of the same haunting rhythm she'd heard in her sleep for years, the one that had always ended with her waking in tears. Now she was awake inside it, and it wasn't ending. A figure appeared ahead. She knew before she saw the face. Etta, the girl who had vanished. The girl Ruby May whispered about like a ghost in a folktale. But she wasn't a ghost. She was tall now, older, no longer the child in the story. Her skin glowed faintly, as if made of pale moonstone. Her eyes shimmered like still water. "You made it," Etta said, her voice calm, too calm. I followed the song, Lila replied. Was it yours? Partly yours too. And Whisper's. Lila glanced at the horse, who stood silent and still, his eyes locked on Etta, like they remembered something unspoken. What is this place? Lila asked. Etta didn't answer. She simply gestured behind her. And the fog parted. What Lila saw stole her breath. A canyon of swirling energy, stretching beyond sight layers upon layers of time, space, memory. She could see glimpses, an old woman cradling a newborn, a fire burning in an ancient forest, a storm sweeping across an ocean of grass, and a figure made of shadow, slinking between them. "What is that?" she whispered. "The thing that came through when I ran," Etta said softly. "I failed, Lila." "No, I was scared. I thought if I disappeared, the gate would stay closed, but I didn't understand. The gate doesn't need to be closed. It needs to be kept." Lila turned slowly. "Then why bring me here? Why whisper?" "Because you're the last keeper," Etta said, "and he's the last guardian." "And what about you?" Etta smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "I'm the mistake that made this necessary." The wind shifted, colder now. The melody twisted into something minor, uncertain. "I've been trying to keep it from spreading," Etta said, "but I'm not enough, not anymore." The shadow in the canyon began to grow, stretching tall, winding like smoke. "I don't understand," Lila whispered. "What do I do?" "You don't do, you become," Etta said. "You don't close the gate. You become the one who watches it, from the inside." Lila blinked. "You mean I can't go back?" Etta stepped forward, laying a hand on her shoulder. "You were never going back, not as the same girl." She looked at Whisper. He knew, from the first moment. The horse took a slow step forward, and then another. Lila's chest ached. "Do I have to let go of everything?" she asked. "Even my name?" Etta nodded once. "Names are like doors. Sometimes they keep us trapped. But who am I without it? You're the wind, Lila. You're the breath between the song and the silence. That's enough." Lila closed her eyes and let it go. The name, the pain, the past. And when she opened them again, she was the gate, not standing before it, not guarding beside it. She was it. The spiral etched itself along her arms, glowing with the light of 7 stars. Whisper stepped closer, his head bowing, and the fog began to thin, but not before Etta spoke one last time. "I'll hold the door while you walk through, but after that, you're the one they'll whisper about." "Will they remember me?" Lila asked. Etta smiled gently. "No, but they'll feel you, in the wind, in the horses that stop and turn to the hills, in the silence just before dawn." On the other side, the pasture was quiet. Evelyn Kane sat alone in the grass, clutching the torn edges of her cloak. The spiral had vanished. The girls had been returned safe, but different, quiet. Ruby May stood nearby, tears tracing the worn lines of her face. "I tried to warn her," she said. "She knew," said Deputy Max, kneeling beside her. He held something in his hands, the leather pouch Lila had carried. Inside, the obsidian still pulsed with light, and beside it, a silver thimble, cracked down the middle. "She's gone," Evelyn whispered. "No," Ruby said. "She's become." They looked toward the ridge, and there, in the wind, a white horse stood, alone, watching. No rider, no saddle, but in his eyes a girl, with no name, but with purpose and wind in her bones. Dry Creek had always been a quiet place, the kind of town where stories lingered longer than strangers. But since that autumn night, the night of the red moon and the spiraling winds, something had shifted. Not everyone could say what it was exactly, but folks felt it in their bones, like the hush before a storm that never quite came. The air was softer now, the wind more thoughtful, and though nobody ever spoke of it directly, they all knew something, or someone, was watching over them. Ruby May didn't talk much these days. She still lived in the little stone house just past the ridge, a teapot always on the stove, a second cup always set across from hers. Some of the children from the nearby school would sneak through the fence to visit her, listening wide-eyed to her stories about a white Mustang that ran with the wind and a girl who had no name, but who belonged to the land like roots to soil. "She wasn't just any girl," Ruby would whisper, her voice like warm cotton. "She was the gate, and the wind listened to her." Sometimes, on still afternoons, Ruby would leave slices of cornbread out by the old barn where Whisper had once been kept. The stall was empty now, but the hay stayed fresh, the boards were polished, and no one, not even Evelyn Kane, dared touch it. Evelyn, for her part, had grown thin and gray in the months since the ritual. The spiral was gone from her chamber wall. The girls, 6 of them, had all been returned to their orphanages, healthy but strangely serene. They spoke in riddles now, hummed melodies no one recognized. One of them had carved a 7-pointed star into the wooden floor of her bunk room and whispered thank you to the sky each morning before breakfast. Evelyn no longer spoke of the gates. She no longer tried to control the forces she once believed she understood. Some nights she'd stand at the edge of the pasture and call a name that wasn't hers to speak anymore. And the wind would answer, low and steady. Not cruel, just final. Deputy Max still visited Rockhaven once a week, mostly to check in on Ruby May. But truth be told, he found himself staring more and more toward the distant hills. He'd never admitted it out loud, not even to his wife, but he knew something had happened up there, something bigger than a child or a horse or even the land itself. One afternoon, he rode out beyond the far creek, past the hollowed-out cottonwoods and into the old dry basin folks called Hollow Wind. That's when he saw it, a stone, not large, not grand, just a flat slab half buried in prairie grass. Etched into it, faint but unmistakable, was the spiral, and beneath it 7 stars carved by hand. In the center, a single indentation. A child's palm. Max dropped to his knees, not out of worship, out of knowing. He reached forward and placed his hand over the print. It didn't fit. It wasn't meant to. Back in town, folks had begun calling the wind her, as in, "Did you hear her last night?" Or, "She came through strong today, knocked the laundry clean off the line." It wasn't a joke, not superstition either. It was memory, turned into air. That winter the snows came later than expected. When they finally did, they blanketed the hills in sheets of silver so bright they seemed to hum in moonlight. Tracks appeared at the edge of Rockhaven hoofprints, circling the old paddock, leading up to the ridge, and then vanishing. No one ever saw the Mustang directly, but they felt him. On one early spring morning, Ruby May heard it again, the soft clink of iron shoes on stone. She shuffled to the porch in her slippers, her breath curling in the dawn. There he was, standing on the rise, white as cloudlight, still as prayer. Whisper. He didn't move, didn't blink, just watched. And in his eyes the color of morning fog, she saw her. Lila. Not as a ghost, not as a child, but as wind itself, free, whole, and watching. Ruby smiled. "You always did like your silence," she murmured. "But I see you, baby girl." The wind kicked up around her, warm and kind, rustling the hem of her nightgown and lifting the gray curls from her brow. Then Whisper turned and was gone. Not like smoke, not like magic, like wind. Later that week, the town erected a small stone marker at the edge of Hollow Wind. No names, just 7 stars in a single spiral. People came by with flowers, feathers, old silver coins. No one said why. They just knew. Children born after that night were quieter, more thoughtful. A few had dreams of hooves in fog, of lullabies without words, of gates made of breath and light. Doctors called it imagination, but Ruby May called it inheritance. One summer, a girl named Maisie, barely 7, hair like wheat, quiet as dust, wandered out into the hills and didn't come home by sundown. The town panicked, searched until midnight, but then she returned, barefoot, smiling. She carried a feather in one hand and a strip of white hair in the other. "Where were you, honey?" her father asked, pulling her close. "I went walking," Maisie said. "With who?" She smiled wider. "With the wind." If this story moved you even just a little, drop a simple 1 in the comments to let us know you felt it too, or type 0 if you think the wind still carries her name. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button. We've got more true animal stories coming your way. Stories about healing, about hope, and about the quiet kind of love that changes everything. See you in the next one.